Okay. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Shalom, Rabbi.
Yaakov or someone over here can get the pictures ready. That will be very helpful. I mean, I have a great picture book, but I don't know how good it's working out to show it. Yaakov, can you get the pictures up?
Not so easily right now.
Okay, wait another second. I think Shlomo Baruch Hashem with his baby.
Slicha, Rabbi.
Huh?
Slicha.
No problem, no problem. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Gold, Daf Puz. We are going to expand Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia's leniency, Benegeya, at least that which is permitted to be done over the Yama Shel Tveria, as we explained, being that Yama Shel Tveria is mamish surrounded by halachic walls. And that is that not only do we say the concept of good achis over water, we are more lenient over water, but Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia introduced the concept of kois, which is that we bend. And as we explained, that even if you have a platform that does not have any mechitzes, as long as the size of the platform is 4 amas by 4 amas, which is 24 tvachim by 24 tvachim, meaning, as we explained, that if you make a hole mamish in the middle of this platform, then you're going to have a hole of 4 by 4 tvachim. So you're going to have 10 tvachim in all directions. And then halacha allows you to, so to say, bend these partitions down. You don't have to bend all of it down. You only have to bend the platform, the area that's aligned with the 4 tefach hole. So koif, it's keilu, it's bent down, and then gud achis, and therefore you are allowed to draw water through this 4 by 4 box. So we are going to learn 3 other scenarios where even if the platform that you have is not 4 amas by 4 amas, your platform is a smaller platform. So you're going to have to position it perhaps differently, either closer to the wall, or instead of putting out the platform horizontally, you're going to have to put out the platform vertically, as we'll give out 3 new cases, and that will allow us, through using the concept of koif and gud achis, to even be allowed with a smaller physical platform to retrieve water from the Yam Shel Tveria, even though the Yam B'chlal has a din of a karmelis, and your platform has a din of a Rishus HaYachid, and midrabanan, you may not transfer from a karmelis to a Rishus HaYachid. Nevertheless, it's going to be considered as if the water is coming from a Rishus HaYachid as well. We're going to learn the new Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to be speaking about a water canal that's passing through a chutzner. We're going to have a huge chiddush on today's daf. It's gold, a golden chiddush. We always learned, and it's correct, that an area 4 by 4 or more, if it's not a Rishus HaYachid nor a Rishus HaRabbim, it becomes a karmelis. But the minimum size is 4 by 4, meaning that if you have an area that is less than 4x4, then it won't even be a carnivalist. It's going to have the status of a makom ptur. That's what we learned. The whole Masechta Shabbos, the whole Masechta ERUVIN. Now we will see lav dafka. Lav dafka, there are times that the size of a makom ptur, and therefore the size of a carnivalist is not connected to 4x4 or less, but it's connected to 3x3. Only if it's less than 3x3 is it a makom ptur. If it's 3x3 or more, in certain scenarios, according to one understanding, this is a machlekes tanoim, and that will become already a carnivalist. Now that's huge. That's a big chiddush. On the Zayin Amud Beis, we're going to have the other Mishnah that we quoted so many times regarding the two balconies that are one not directly on top of the other, but one is higher than the other. They are side by side, one higher than the other. One of those mechitzas made, one of those balconies made this halachic mechitza, whether going up, whether going down. The other did not. And that was the whole din. Here again, you have two chatzeros, two balconies that have access to a third area, to the place where you draw the water. If they are not ma'at of one with the other, the fact that both of them have rights to the third area, one prohibits it on the other, neither of them may use it, and a lot more. Okay, whoever has pictures will tremendously benefit by using them. If the pictures are good for you, you have to get used to every sefer has your own style of pictures. We are in Daf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the top of the Amid, or the second wide line. Again, we explained the chiddush of Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya. We say both koif and gud achis, and now we're going to expand that further. Omar Abaye, divrei Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya. Case number 1, new case number 1. Avada, guys, just practically what Abaye is coming to tell you is that if you have this type of platform that's 4x4 amas, then what we're saying now is not needed. Abaye is referring to someone right before Shabbos, and they realize that their measurement of their platform is not as large as 4x4. So there is still, in certain circumstances, based on the principles of Rabbi Hananya, it's still going to be okay. What will be okay? That as long as this platform that you're putting out horizontally, if the edges that are closest to the wall is within less than 3 tvachim from the wall, now we are allowed to use the concept of lavud. What are we benefiting? I'm going to tell you what I'm benefiting. Before we learned that you have this platform and you're making a square in the middle, and then koif halachically, each direction is being bent down because you need to have a mechitza. When you bend it down, that's tall 10 tvachim. If the platform is already very close to the wall is already one of such partitions. You can use the wall as a partition. Now does the wall have to be touching the opening? No. As long as the wall, which is going down, is within less than 3 tvachim, because of lavud, it's one mechitza. So if it's put smuch tvachim, now true, the length. The length is that which goes aligned to the wall. The length is what many people might even call the width. So it's the direction where you have to bend the wall down from both sides. You're still going to need to have the 4 amas, which means you're going to need to have 24 tvachim, because you are going to carve out, you're going to cut out a box in the center, and you're going to need on each side 10 tvachim. So 10 plus 4 plus 10 is 24 tvachim, which is 4 amas. But here, the advantage will be is that the width means going from the house outwards, you will only need 11 and a bit. Why 11 and a bit? Because you're going to need, for the wall that's opposite the wall of the house, you need 10 tvachim. You need 10 tvachim. Has to go down 10. But what about the box? Here's the ma'ila. Since there is a gap between the wall and where you're putting out this platform, I know the gap is a little bit less than 3. As long as you're going to carve out, you're going to place that platform by the boundary. It's going to be 3 minus a drop. You're going to carve out an opening, not 4. It's going to be from right to left 4. But going front, you only do 1 and a bit. What happens when you do 1 and a bit? Now you have an actual opening between the physical wall and the house. And the end of the hole, you have 4 tvachim. And over there's no lavud because you carved out 1 and a bit. You went beyond lavud. but still you went into the platform. The fact that the rest of the platform is less than 3 tefachim from the wall of the house, yes, that side may be used as one of the walls. So the Valdik, now you're going to have from all 4 sides a mechitza dalid from one side, the wall of the house. And then you're going to have koif on the other sides, and therefore you're going to have, again, a proper reshus hayachid underneath these halachic mechitzas, and now you are allowed to draw the water up from the now reshus hayachid water, which is directly vertically aligned with the hole and your platform. Case number 2, now what happens if your platform is not even 4 amas by 11 and a little bit? You have a smaller platform. Here again, it's usable. But now this case and the next case will only allow you to place the platform not horizontally, but you're going to have to already place the platform vertically. Oh, so what's going to be hoisos and kufa if you're placing it vertically? Well, you're going to have the platform is going to have to be tall 10 tefachim because the platform is going to be the mechitza. And now what about the width? The width has to be 6 tefachim and 2 little bits. Watch on 2 little bits, because here again, you are putting the platform how close to the wall? You're putting it a drop less than 3 tefachim. So for you now to have the 4 tefach opening on each side, you have to have 1 and a bit to hit number 4. So it's going to be gavaldik. So as long as it is the width. Now, what's going to happen, guys, until now, whoever can watch this, until now, koif means that you bent it down, that the platform is physically horizontal, and halachically, you're bending it down koif. When we're speaking now about putting it near the wall, koif won't mean bending it down, it's going to be bending it to the side. In other words, since the platform, we're going to have to bring the sides, the moment the side is a little bit less than 3 close to the wall. Now those sides, because of lavud, now you have the width of 4 tefachim that go down 10. It's 4 by 10. No, the platform is going to be 4 tefachim away. The platform is going to be placed vertically 4 tefachim away because you need a whole 4 by 4. To bring it back to the wall, you don't need it to be 4 tefachim. You only need to bring it in within lavud. How much is that? A tefach and a bet and a tefach and a bit of each side. So gavaldi. That's the 6 tefachim. Like we mentioned, a tefach and a bit and tefach and a bit. And then in the middle, the place that's not bent has to be 4. So that's 6 and 2 mashahus. And now the third case, here is going to be a case where you don't even have a platform as large as this. Still, there will be circumstances when it's going to be halachically usable. And that's going to be when you put it near a corner. That if you're standing it again vertically, but near a keren zaviyas, so it's always going to have to be 10 tefachim tall because the mechitza physically has to be 10 tefachim. But now the width is only going to have to be 2 tefachim and 2 mashahus. 2 and 2, because here one is going to go into one wall. The other one is going to go within less than 3 tefachim from the perpendicular other wall. And if you have a picture, you'll see, even though it's really a very, relative to what we learned until now, it's a very small platform. If you have a corner and it has at least a height of 10, and it has the width of 2 tefachim and a little bit, each side a little bit, and if you place it properly towards that corner, then there again, within that corner, you will be able to draw water also based on koif. But here again, koif won't be going from horizontal to vertical. Koif is going to be going, so to say, you're bending it inwards. It was standing vertical, but koif to make a perpendicular shape to this platform. All right. And if you have a picture, it's very easy. If not, some people have the capacity to imagine this clearly in their minds. Some people have more of a yegiyah, but it's understandable. Says the Gemara, that Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia says that in order to use this principle of koif and good achis, he spoke about 4 amas by 4 amas. Gezustera, sheyesh badalad amas al dalad amas, then choykek badalad al dalad tvachim, arba'a an arba'a, umemali. Why would we need such a large platform? Why didn't Rabbi Hananya lachatchila allow you to have a smaller platform? So the Gemara says that's when the avida kiyasisa, that's when you have to make it shaped like a mortar. Why would you have to make it shaped like a mortar? Well, there's different scenarios. You know, there's some people that put a picture over here. If you don't have a wall of a house, if you are mamish in middle of the ocean, right, today you're oil drilling and you have a platform and you want to be able to, for whatever reason, take the salt water up on Shabbos, there is no house to use as any of the mechitzas. The mortar means that when you bend it down to all 4 sides, then it looks like a mortar. No, if you cannot rely on a wall of a house, then you have to have 4 amas by 4 amas. The chiddush that we're learning today is that if you are protruding it from a home, then you are able to make use of the principles of koif and gudachis, even with a smaller platform. All right. So now we start the new Mishnah. And here again, if you were to have a picture book, it's going to be very beneficial. Let me just... if it's shaykh, at least if you can freeze it and take a look at it for the web audience over here. I'm using my Hahoid ve'Hahadar. And the new picture, the new Mishnah is as picture Tov Kuf Yud Dalet. So here you have, my friends, a chatzir. You have one chatzir. Not speaking about the ERUVIN chatziris. You have a house and a yard. And you're going to have a canal that's going through the chatzir. Now, this is very much related to the Mishnah that we learned in the last year in Daf Pei Vav, the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda, that allows us to use the walls of the chatzir that's traveling over the canal by the principle of good achis to halachically section off, close off the canal, and now the canal is a Reshus HaYachid, the Shalom Al Yisrael. But not following the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda, based on the Tanaim that we had in the previous Mishnah, that you have to add a mechitza. So let's read it inside. Amas hamayim shiur that is b'chatzir ein mimala himenu b'Shabbos. Because here again, guys, the water, the amas hamayim, obviously, just to add something that we know that we're always speaking about a body of water that's in an area that's at least 10 tvachim deep, and it's at least 4 tvachim wide, which makes it into a chashav reshus for itself, because if the canal is so narrow or so shallow that it has a din of a makom ptur, then I don't need any mechitzas. One is allowed to take from a makom ptur into a reshus hayachid. No, since it has that size, the water in there is considered a carmelis. One is not allowed to take from a carmelis into a reshus hayachid, ela in kain, only if also mechitzas gavoya. You tvachim, you have to add underneath the wall. You have to make mechitzas that are 10 tvachim tall and place them both on one end of the canal where it enters and on the other end of the canal where it leaves. Now, how exactly do you make that mechitza? Where exactly do you place it? So the Gemara doesn't have to repeat it. The Mishnah also doesn't have to repeat it. That is exactly all of the shitas that we learned in the last daf. Lamaila, lamatam, whether it's lamaila in the boil, whether it's lamaila from the surface of the water. All of the opinions that we had in the previous daf has to be now copy and pasted over here. And likewise, the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda that ascribes to good achis over water doesn't need any additional special mechitzas made. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Koisel Sha'al Gaba is Tidoin Mishum Mechitza. Mamish like Daf Pei Vav. Now, Omer Rabbi Yehuda, I want you to know Maisa Ba'amo. Shel Ovel. Ovel is the name of a place that there was a canal that went through that area. Shahoyu Memalim Memenu Al Pia Zekanim B'Shabbos, that the Zekanim, the elders, allowed the Yidden that lived in that area to draw water from the canal without adding any mechitzas, like my opinion, Amrullah. So the Chachamim in our Mishnah, all of the Tanoim that argue with Rabbi Yehuda tells them the reason why you're right, why they did there, we know nothing, no additional mechitzah was added, because the canal over there did not have the minimum share like we mentioned. What's the minimum share? 10 tvachim deep, 4 tvachim width. Only then is the area of the canal considered a chashuv place and a karmelis. If it's lesser than that, it's considered a makom ptur. If it's a makom ptur, b'chlal, there's no problem, because then you're taking water from a makom ptur into a reshus hayachid, and that was the case in the Amos Shel Ovel. Okay, The Gemara further elaborates. We learned in the Brayso that asul la bichnisa. If they made a partition only in one side of where the canal enters the chatzit, v'lo yasu la biyitzia, but not on the other side, or in reverse, asul la biyitzia v'lo yasu la bichnisa. In other words, it's not partitioned off to make it a halachic reshus hayachid ein memalin hemenu b'Shabbos elam kain asul la mechitza yutfachim both biyitzia and b'knisa. In other words, the Brayso is simply just elaborating more. That's the same sheet of all of the Tanaim other than Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Kaisel Shal Gaba, Tiden Mishum Mechitza. And weiter, in the Brayso also we have the story that Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maisa Ba'amas Hamayim Shohaisa Ba'a Mei Avel to the city Tzipori. And V'hoyim Amalan Emenu B'Shabbos Al Piyazekenu. Is the Haraya that we say good achis and no additional Mechitza has to be placed within this canal. No, there's no proof from over there. The reason there nothing else was needed, nor it didn't have both the depth of 10 tfachim and the width of 4 amas. 4 tfachim, which means that it's a halachic, markim ptur. And since it's a markim ptur, you have b'chlal no issue, even though you made no additional mechitzas. Okay. Now, we're going to learn a Brayso. The Brayso is enigmatic. The Brayso is not clear. And we're going to have no less than 3 different ways of understanding this Brayso. Tanya either. Let's begin. Amas Hamayim, when there was a canal of water, how Iveres Bein HaChaloim is that was going in between windows. So again, you need to have a picture. So here would be my picture. For those of you who have Gemaras with pictures, I hope this can be seen over here. The one over here. For the web audience on Chabad.org. For the one over here, for people that are using the Sefer HaHoid VeHaHoder, we're going to picture Tov Kuf Tez Zayin.
I send it on WhatsApp.
So you don't have, it's not about a chutzner, no chutzner. Right, you're living in Venice, and the street in front of your house is not a street, it's a canal of water. And windows are going over it. Again, it's advantageous to be able to be allowed to draw water from a window into the house. So says the Brayso like this: if it's less than 3 tfachim, what's less than 3 tfachim? It's not clear. That's what we'll have to clarify. If it's less than 3, good. Then it's shalshadali. Then you can take lower a bucket, umamali, and fill up the bucket's water, bring it back into the house through the chaloim. But if it's 3, if the width is 3 or more, then then you can't use a bucket to gather the water. Now, I agree with the concept that something here has to have a minimum width lesser than which it's kosher, larger than width not kosher to draw the water, but the shiur is not 3, but pachos midalad. Again, dalad here means arba. Oh, it's 4 tfachim. Pachos midalad, yes, mishal shadli mamali. Dalad ein mishal shadli mamali. That's the Brayso. And again, like we mentioned, we're going to have 3 different ways of understanding pshat in the Brayso. Asks the Gemara, b'maya skin, and what are you talking about? What's the width of 3? 3 tfachim. That we're speaking about the width of the canal. Now remember, guys, if the canal itself is not a makim chashuv, and until now, not only today on Daf Pei Zayin, from when we started Shabbos, we always said a cardinalist is an area that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. Elamam, for whatever reason, it's not a reshus hayachid. So in other words, if we're speaking about the canal, and you're trying to tell me that, I know that Ashbag is telling you that it needs to be, if it's 4 tfachim, then it's a cardinalist. If it's less, which is what we learned until now, then it's a makim ptur, but that's only that Ashbag. So are you telling me that there is a Tana that holds that the cut-off shiur of a cardinalist makim ptur is 3 tfachim? Where do we have such a thing? The Elyahu, for example, that when Avdimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he came with the teaching of Rabbi Yechanan, that ein cardinalist b'chusa midalet. Right? And no one, we never heard of another opinion. So if here we are trying to understand that the Brayso is referring to a body of water that's in a makim ptur, and the Tanakama will hold it's only a makim ptur if it's less than 3 tfachim. Why? Are you telling me lema kitanoi amro l'shmaitza? Bitamol, this whole shiur of a cardinalist and a makim ptur is a machlekes tanoim? Elo, because of that, we're going to come back to this, but because of that, It's not referring to the width of the body of water. Of course, if the width of the body of water is going to be less than 4, everyone holds B'chlal, there's no problem. The case must have been that the canal itself was 4 tfachim or more. The canal is a makim, is a karmelis. But the mila here is that the houses, the windows were not directly above the water. That the windows were above, like we would call this, the river bank. And then the river bank went down into the river, which means that when you would lower a bucket, you would have an option of not going directly from your window into the water. Your window, your house, or the water or a karmelis, which is also midrabanan, but you get to make a stop off by the karmelis. You get to make a stop off by the water bank. It's called by the wings of the river because it's like on the sides of the river. The banks of the river. And what we are allowing is lahachlif. Lahachlif means you're not only making a stopover, but since you are going from the bucket is going from a Reshus HaYachid to a Makim Ptur, from the Makim Ptur into a Karmelis. That's permitted. Same thing back in the back. You're taking it out of the Karmelis, you're stopping by the Agapel, then you're going from the Agapel and Akira and Hanachim to Reshus HaYachid. So you are exchanging the domains through the banks. So now the question is not regarding how wide does an area have to be a karmelis, it's how wide does an area have to be a makim ptur. Now that in itself is going to be something people are going to say, whoa, hold on, aren't they interrelated? In other words, anything that's less than a karmelis becomes a makim ptur. So what did we benefit right now? We're going to clarify this in a moment. In other words, the makim ptur, you're telling me that in order for the banks to be a makim ptur, the banks have to be less than 3. Why? Also, didn't we always learn that if it's less than 4, so it's not a karmelis. If it's not a karmelis, it's a makim ptur. Hold that thought. We're going to read a Rashi that's going to address that. I hear again, if you have an area that's in between a Reshus HaYachid and a Reshus HaRabbi, and that area is a makim ptur. Why is it a makim ptur? Because it's less than 4 by 4. So even though each Reshus is allowed to use it, for example, they can both rest their backpacks on it. They can be mekatev, but did we not learn ubovat shalay achlifu? But for something to go from the Reshus HaYachid to this makim ptur into the Reshus HaRabim and vice versa, that was something we never allowed. Here we're saying, forget about the dimensions of why is it only a makim ptur if it's less than 3. Shelve that. We're going to learn that Rashi in a moment. But so what? Let's say it's a makim ptur. But if you're taking from a karmelis into a Reshus HaYachid, why are you telling me that we are allowed, even with the stopover, to make that final journey when you're ending up going from one domain, a karmelis, to a Reshus HaYachid? So the Gemara answers, yeah. When is it not allowed to be machlif when you're going from a Reshus HaYachid to Reshus HaRabim? Reshuya is Doiraisa, Reshus HaYachid, Reshus HaRabim. Chazal were afraid that if you're going to make a stopover in the makim ptur, you might end up forgetting to make the stopover. You might go, God forbid, directly from Reshus HaYachid to Reshus HaRabim or the other way around, and then the person will be violating an Isur Doiraisa. Over here, to begin with, what's the whole issue? A karmelis or Reshus HaYachid is only an Isur D'Rabbanan, so it's like a gzeira on a gzeira. Here we are allowed to be machlif. Let's read it inside. Hassan Reshuya is Doiraisa. That's Pei Zayin Amid Beis. Hacha Reshuya is the Rabbanon. Now, before we go on, go back to that Pei Zayin Amid Aleph. Let's go into Rashi 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We resolved the permissibility as long as you stop over in a makim ptur. That ultimately end up taking something from the karmelis into a Reshus HaYachid, or same thing with the bucket, to take the bucket from the Reshus HaYachid and ultimately allow it to go into the water. But here again, like, what did we accomplish? Once we push back karmelis, the karmelis is Lakula Alma, the shiur is 4. But now we are accepting that a makim ptur is a machlekes tanoim. So let's read inside the bottom Rashi. Says Rashi that the Afal Gav, 2 lines from the bottom. The Afal Gav that Ravdimi makim ptur bepachus ma'arba. Same Ravdimi that you quoted before also clarified that. And V'hachi ka'amri Rabbanan, and according to the way we are understanding the Braisa right now, it's coming out that the Shita B'Chachamim is that the Shloisha, if the bank, not the water, the bank on side of the water, if it's already 3, it's no longer a makim ptur. So Leka L'Neimer Dahar Shmaitza Basraisa that Abdimi Kitanoi Omro. Here you can't ask what we asked before. Is it a machlekes time? It's not. And listen to this chiddush. The ikal amemer, because I will argue the following. The gab ereshuya is do ayraisa, anything that's adjacent, either ereshus hayachid or ereshus harabim. There, the reshuyos themselves are chashiv, because the Torah gives it a classification. Then, havi pachus midalit hasamach lahu batul etzlan. Any area that's near it, that's less than 4, is batul to the biblical reshus, and therefore it becomes a makim ptur. It becomes insignificant, and no one debates that. But here we're speaking about an area that's adjacent to Carmelis. Carmelis itself is not such a chashuv area. The whole definition of a Carmelis is a halachic definition. So here perhaps if it's 3 tvachim, it's already not batal to it, so it cannot be called a makim ptur. It has to be, according to the Tanakh, less than 3 tvachim. So what did we learn on Pei Zayin? A new thing over here. One approach will be that if someone were to ask you, how small does an area have to be for it to be called a makim ptur? Mamash, everyone who learned until now will say, I know. It has to be an area that's not 4 by 4. No. That if this area is adjacent to Carmelis, perhaps if it's 3 by 3, it's already not a makim ptur. Wow. Only if it's less than 3 by 3, according to the Tanach, top of the Yomid. Let's go back to the Lahachlef. You were telling me that the issue of exchanging that the Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yechanan spoke about was only going from the Shuyas Doiraisa. It's not true. Rabbi Yechanan also does not allow for you to carry something between 2 rabbinic Rishuyas, or between a Rishus Hayachad and a Carmelis, or between a Rishus Harabim and a Carmelis, or the other way around, even though it's only the Rabbanan. And where do we find this statement of Rabbi Yechanan? So here we have the Tanya that's put in parentheses because really this is a Mishnah. The Knan, we had the above and Dafayin Vav, Koisel Shubein Beis Chatzeiros, when you have a wall that's in between 2 Chatzeiros, that's tall, 10 Tvachim, and the wall itself is deep, and therefore the top of the wall is wide for Tvachim Arba'ah. So what did the Mishnah say? In a case where there is no Chaloin nor Pesach, Ma'arvin Shnayim, and you don't even have the option to aim Ma'arvin Echad. Now the Mishnah goes further. Not that you are allowed to take it up, but something that's already there can be used, because since the top of the wall is a Rishus HaYachid, a Rishus Bifnei Atzmai, you can carry in a Rishus HaYachid. However, the Mishnah continues, if Nifratz HaKoisel, if there is a breach in the wall, so if the breach is only up until 10 amas, including 10 amas, Ad Va'ad B'chlal, we learned above in the Masechta, the Ma'arvin Shnayim, the Imrotzu Ma'arvin Echad, because we view such a breach as a Pesach and not as a breach. If Yoisil Mikan, but if the breach is more than 10 Tvachim, then the only option is Ma'arvin Echad, the Ma'arvin Shnayim. Period. And on that, guys, we learned this all above on the Fayin Vav, the Havin and Ba. The Mishnah spoke about if the wall is thick 4 Tvachim, then Oichlin on the top. What happens if the wall doesn't even have 4? It doesn't even have 4, and this is adjacent, not a Carmelis. This is adjacent a Rishus HaYachid. So as we learned, the moment it's less than 4, L'kula Alma, it's called a Makom Ptur, right? V'amar Rav Avir Beis Rishuyos Sholtos Boy, since it's a Makom Ptur, and it's batal to both sides, both Chatzeiros, so to say, swallow it in. So carrying on top of the wall is like carrying from one Rishus to the other. That was enough. And therefore, Yaz's boy, even Maloinima, you can't even move the fruit there, the movement of the width of a hair. However, Rabbi Yechanan, what says the other Rabbi? He says, not only do we not view the top of the wall as 2 Rishois that were not bound together with an Eruv, but you are allowed to carry from the Chatzar to the top. And we're not done yet. In other words, it doesn't acquire the status of the Chatzar. And therefore, it doesn't acquire the status of both Chatzeres together. We're not done yet. Now here comes the punchline. And va'az Rabbi Yechanan l'tamei d'chiyas Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yechanan makim she'ein by arba l'arba mutal of neder shus rabim ul of neder shus yachal lekatev olav u'bodat shelo yachlifu. It's now that we made this equation between the top of the wall that's in between two reshuyos hayachid, guys carrying from one chutzner to the neighboring chutzner, it is not any biblical violation. It's a rabbinic violation. It's just like the rabbinic violation carrying from a karmelis to a reshus hayachid. And the fact that we are equating the statement of Rav Dimi and Rabbi Yechanan is that there we spoke about shelo yachlifu. If we are equating it to at the top of the wall that's in between two reshuyos, which is only midrabanan, prohibited to carry from one to the other. So l'cha'ura, that in turn should mean that Rabbi Yechanan would not allow for you to be mechatev either. So here again, what benefit do you have of making the agapeh into a makom ptur? The goal is to take a bucket from your window and to go all the way into the amas hamayim and then to bring it back into the house. How would you be allowed to do that? So the Gemara says, first of all, I want you to know, the last statement, the last equation that we just made, right, is the Iri said. According to the Rav Dimi made no such an equation. So what we benefit is that we don't have a kasha lit Rav Dimi. So what? So the Gemara says, okay, so even if this equation was not made by Rav Dimi, but according to Zeiri, not Zeiri made that equation. Zeiri will not allow you to be yachlifu. So obviously Zeiri will have to learn a different understanding in the Braisa. And indeed, he does. So here we have approach number 2. Zeiri says that the width that we are discussing is not the width of the water banks. Let's go back to the beginning. Ba'amas hamayim gufa. Chavra, buckle your seatbelts. And yes, that's according to that, when Avdimi came and he came with Rabbi Yechanan that the width of a karmelis is 4 tfachim or more, and no one seems to argue. According to Zeiri, the statement of Rav Dimi is subject to a machlokes tanoim. In other words, if the canal is a makom ptur, then you can carry. If the canal is considered a karmelis, then you can't take the water from the canal into the house. And that's exactly the machlokes in the Brais on Daf Pei Zayin. That the Tanach holds for the canal to be considered a makom ptur, the canal has to be less than 3. Because if it's 3 tfachim, it's already a karmelis. Wow. It's already a karmelis. Rashvag, and that was what Rav Dimi came on Rabbi Yechanan. No, that a karmelis is only 4, the width of 4 by 4. Now the Gemara has another kasha. Okay, if it's less than 3, if it's less than 4, each tana l'shitasoi, then it's called a makom ptur. But I have a general, bigger picture question. If you remember, many times we learned a lot in Shabbos that if you have an area that's classified as a reshus hayachid or as a reshus rabim, and there's an area right near it, the example is you have a hole in a wall. The hole itself, the area where you can place things, is not 4 by 4 tfachim. But since it's in a wall, for example, and the wall is considered a reshus hayachid, so the chayr of the wall is also a reshus hayachid. So the question here is going to be, this goes on both tanoim. Even if the canal is so narrow that where it goes in between the windows, when it's going in this area, it's less than the kadam al-shir. But somewhere, a little bit back, a little bit front, the canal opens up. There, it's going to be a karmelis. So why don't we say that the entire canal has a din of the chayre of a karmelis, and all of it should be considered a karmelis, the tebiki chayre karmelis? So answers the Gemara, Baya bar Oven. Virab Chanina bar Oven, Bi Amri Tarvayu, this whole concept of you having a location near a rabbinic location, becoming buckled to it, extending the status to the chayr, is not said by a karmelis. It's said by a reshus hayachid. It's said by a reshus harabim. It's not said by a karmelis. However, Rav Ashi Omar, afilu tema yesh chayr la karmelis. Nevertheless, hanimili, like the chayr of a reshus hayachid. We gave a great example. You have a wall, and then you have in the wall a little indentation, a little crevice. That's a reshus hayachid. The crevice itself doesn't have 4 by 4 tefachim. I don't care. It's in the wall. But the crevice is taken near the wall. It's in the wall. It's adjacent to the reshus hayachid. And taka, if the canal of water, right beyond the window area, would be wide, whatever the shit is needed to make it into a carmelis, then taka, you would have a kasha. But we only apply chayrin bismucha when it's near the carmelis. Now, what does near mean? We already had this above. If it's 4 tvachim, or maybe less than 4 tvachim, the moment it's been mufleges, the moment it's 4 tvachim or more, then we never apply chayre reshus hayachid or chayre reshus haravim, and likewise over here, not chayre karmelis. Even though Rashi holds that we do, the concept does exist, there is something called chayren lekarmelis. And now, my friends, we're going to learn the third approach of understanding the Braisa on Amud Aleph when it speaks about the width of less than 3 l'tanakama, or less than 4 l'rashba gravina amar. What are we referring to? Kegoin the avad la nifke apuma. What did we learn on Daf Pei Zayin, the first Mishnah? What did we learn on Daf Pei Vav? That not the Rebbe Yehuda that subscribes to good achis mechitza. That you have to actually to section off an area of water that's going inside a canal or it's in a pit, you have to put a mechitza in there. The case here is that the people that had the windows open to the canal, they placed a mechitza in the canal, but they didn't place the mechitza across entirely. They have placed a mechitza, it's like 2 front teeth that have a gap in the middle. They placed a mechitza that goes in, Lebeisila, Lebeishamai, however deep it needed to go in, but the mechitza didn't go all the way across. There was an opening, it's 2 mechitzas going down there. Now we're going to speak about lavut. If the opening in between the 2 mechitzas is less than 3, if lavut is less than 3, then it's considered a bona fide mechitza, which is the sheet of the Tanakh and the Braisa. Rashbag, who says less than 4, he's speaking about the gap in between these mechitzas that you put in there on each side. Each side had this double mechitza. According to Rashbag, lavut is only 4 tvachim or more, which is a kula, which means even if the opening is less than 4 tvachim, because of lavut, it's considered a bona fide mechitza, and therefore all of the water there, b'yitziyah, b'chnisa, or b'yitziyah is considered a reshus hayachid. You're going to avad nifke yapume. You made outlets, you made openings, right in its mouth. That they hold lavud, the sheet of lavud is 3 tvachim. So you need to have the opening less than 3 to be allowed to use the instrument, the tool of lavud. And Rashbag goes latame that lavud is up until less than 4. So even if it's 3, as long as the opening in these mechitzas, in between one and the other, on each side is less than 4 because of lavud, it's considered bona fide mechitzas, and therefore the whole area of the water is considered a reshus hayachid. Okay, now this Mishnah we already learned a few times, so now we're reviewing it. Says the Mishnah. Really, there are 2 separate dinim here. Din number 1, gezustara, a balcony, shehila mayla min amayim. Now that we learned, when they added the Gemara, now you appreciate it more. According to those who said that the Braisa is speaking about there's a bank, there's no bank. You open up your window, if you look down, you're by water. And therefore, when you put a balcony, the balcony is mamish going over the water. Venice. Why not? Because of this principle. If the body of water, when the body of water is considered a carmelis, like we learned today, why would that be? Because as long as the depth of the river is 10 tvachim, and the width is 4 by 4 tvachim or more, it's going to be a lot more than that, but if you have that minimum size, that's called a carmelis. Midarabanan, you cannot take anything from a carmelis into a reshus hayachid. So what do you need to do? Elim kain asalam mechitza is gevoyas asar tvachim, like we spoke. Everyone, if you make a mechitza over a body of water, we are allowing to use the instrument of good achis mechitza. The mechitzas can be going milmayla, they can be going above the balcony, and they can be going underneath the balcony. And if you have a picture, you'll see this clearly. Doesn't matter. Point is that you're going to have an area of 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. Mechitzas of 10 on each side, halachically goes down, not until the water surface. It goes all the way down to the end, to the bottom of the river. So all of the water that's in this river is considered water from a Reshus HaYachid. So you are taking from a Reshus HaYachid to a Reshus HaYachid. Even between two Reshus HaYachid, you have to make an Eruv. It's good to speak it out. No, when did Shlomo HaMelech say you have to make an Eruv? When both Reshus HaYachid are occupied, are habitated by people. No one is living in the water. It's like a churva, for example, that if it's your churva adjacent to my house, if you don't use it, it's just my house adjacent to your churva. I'm allowed to use the churva. There's no issue b'chlal because it's not being lived in. Same thing as with water. V'chein, yeah, the Mishnah says v'chein, but the v'chein, the link between the first din and the second din is just another law about balconies. That's all it is, because the din is a whole new din. This v'chein is what we quoted so many times, based on the principle that we learned, Be'ikad and Peirik Shvi'i, right? Which is when you have two chatzeros, Peirik Chaloin, when you have two chatzeros that have equal access to a third area, equal access, whether they can access it equally with ease or equally with difficulty. If these two chatzeros between themselves did not make an eruv, one's rights to that third area prohibits the other one to use it, and vice versa as well. Neither can use the third area, which is the case over here. Again, it's not one on top of the other, exactly aligned vertically, but no, they are apart horizontally, not very far apart. That will change it. But let's call this a sukkah porch. Each one would be allowed to build a sukkah. The one on the top, the one that's higher, is not directly above the one that's lower. But they are near enough to each other. Lamayla means whether it's less than 10 tefachim, we have that above, whether it's 10 tefachim or more. But there is a way for the people in either balcony to go to the other one. One guy can go up, one guy can go down. And this halachic, both of them had a hole in their balcony going over the water. So for the week, no one needed to use the other one's balcony. But this halachic partition using the instrument of good achis was only made by the balcony that's l'maylo. And the concept was that the tachtoina should make use of the mechitzas of the Elyahu. If they were not ma'arev, says the Mishnah, shteyem asurais, at sheyei arvu, because of the principle of Perek Chaloin, Gezustra Aleph, Gezustra Beis, both of them have equal access to the whole. Why is it called equal? That's the whole point. If it's one is 10 tefachim or more further away, we'll see that's not called easy access. If they are horizontally 4 tefachim or further away, it's also not called equal. When it's considered halachically equal access, the fact that they were not ma'arev brings about the isur one on the other. Okay, says the Gemara. We started today and we finished yesterday's shiur speaking about Hananya ben Akavia's leniency, who holds that not only do we say good achas mechitza over a body of water, but you actually don't need mechitzas that are standing vertical. If your gezustada is large enough, which is 4 amas by 4 amas, regardless where did you place it vis-a-vis the wall of your house? Or as we started to learn today, if it's placed closer to the wall of the wall of the house sometimes can be used as one of the mechitzas. You don't even need to place mechitzas. You halachically bend the platform, taking it from a horizontal position to a vertical position, koif and gudachis. So is it masnisna lekar Hanan ben Akavia? The Tanya Hanan ben Akavia oimer gezustra sheyesh v'dal ames. That's all you need. That's shiur. Always that will be enough. Maybe even less. All you need to do is to make a hole in the middle of it, allowing 10 tefachim of horizontal balcony space on each side of the hole. And because of the instrument of koif, it's considered a mechitza. And then gudachis umemale. And our Mishnah speaks about making mechitzas gavoyos. So Amar Rabbi Yechanan Mishum Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra. Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia Elo b'yama shel Tiberia hoyol v'yeshua. There's something unique about the Kinneret, or how the Mishnah calls it, the Sea of Tiberias, because since around the body of water, either you're going to have oiganim high banks, or you're going to have a certain area, cities go all the way up until the edge, like Tiberia goes all the way until the edge, or you have a Karpeth, or you have Makiva Soisa. In other words, it's so enclosed We're not saying that it's not a cardinalist. But what we are saying is that why did Chazal say that you may not carry from a Reshus HaYachid to a cardinalist, even though Midoiraisa cardinalist is a Reshus HaYachid? See, Midoiraisa, if it's not a Reshus HaRabim and not a Makim Ptur, which is a very insignificant area, it's automatically a Reshus HaYachid. But they said, no, since a cardinalist is an area that many people use it, it looks like a Reshus HaRabim. If one would have been allowed to carry from a cardinalist to a Reshus HaYachid or vice versa, people erroneously will end up carrying from a Reshus HaRabim to a Reshus HaYachid. Fine. So when you the less similar a cardinalist is to a Reshus HaRabim, the less fear we have. Such a cardinalist, like the Yamashol Teverium, that's mamish makifois, it's encircled with halachic mechitzas, it's very dissimilar to a Reshus HaRabim. So to begin with, now we're not saying that you are allowed to carry from a cardinalist to a Reshus HaYachid. We're not saying that, but we are saying is that there are madregas in a cardinalist, and such a cardinalist to begin with was less problematic, and only over there was Hananya, Rabbi Hananya, or Hananya ben Akavia lenient, allowing us to say koif. Sanai is a koif and godachis. It's not just koif. That in itself is a chiddush. But we already spoke so many times that really many people hold that you can't use two halacha l'moshe mesinais together. But coming back over here you can use it. Avo b'shar meimois, even Hananya ben Akavia, why will not allow you to use koif? Our Mishnah is a general Mishnah. So it doesn't differentiate, and there, if it's not the Amos Shel Teveria or something similar, you have to physically make mechitzos gemoyos yud tvachim. All right. So now that we quote this kula, let's begin at least, see how far we'll get. Tanach Rabbanim. Tanach Rabbanim says the Gemara, says the Braisa, Gimel, Devarim, Hitir, Rabbi Hanani ben Akavia la'anshi Teveria. Clearly, he lived over there because even though he never said Yama Shel Kineres, Yama Shel Teveria, but he gave the psak din for the Chaver in his city. So there were 3 tatum that he gave in that city. Number 1 is what we just learned, that memalin mayim migizustera b'Shabbos, even if you didn't make mechitzas, as long as the size of the balcony is large enough that if you were to bend it down and still have a hole of 4x4, you were to have the mechitzas. Number 2, you are allowed to time and store a produce the way they kept it fresh. They had no refrigeration. We learned about this so many times. They would either bury it in the ground, but here we're not speaking about burying it in the ground, but we're speaking about using certain residue of grain, certain residue of legumes. After you took out what you need, that residue was normally given to animal feed. But that also had this quality that if you were to bury something in there, if you were to store some good fruit in there, it would remain fresher much longer. You are allowed to the time in ba'atza. Now, what would be the issue, as the Gemara is going to explain? The issue here is not about muktzah, which is an issue, but that's not what he's referring to. This is Bechlala issue Benegeya Tuma and Tara, as we'll explain in a moment. But he was mated, and he held because of the unique circumstance of Anshe Tiverium that even though we'll speak it out in a moment, it doesn't. The produce that is being stored in this residue of beans or the residue of grains does not become muchshar lekabel tuma. And number 3, coming back to Adin and Hilchas Shabbos, umistafgin ba'alointis, you are allowed to dry yourself with the towel on Shabbos, which is a sugya that we had in Shabbos. Again, more details in a moment. First of all, even though that nowadays, as we mentioned, we may not bathe, not even in cold water, but as we learned so much together in Shabbos, the Isur, the Rabbanon, was not being allowed to bathe in warm water, because maybe the bathhouse attendants will actually warm up the water on Shabbos. Bathing in cold water is actually the end of Masechta Shabbos, the story of Rabbah bathing in cold water on Shabbos. Okay, and not only that, we also learned that the Isur of going into hot water was removed by Chamei Tveria. There you can even bathe in hot water. But the issue is regarding a towel. So if you remember, what's the issue with a towel? That if you're going to walk your towel home, remember that? You might end up squeezing out the towel. Squeezing out liquid from a towel is malabing. Also these details. There's schita that's connected to dash. But when we said whenever you have water in something, that's part of the laundering process. Even today, you go into your laundry machine, into your the washer. One setting is it squeezes it out. You have to squeeze the liquid out. It's called malabing. And are we afraid that you'll do libun if the towel gets filled with water? So he says that you can use a towel. We're not afraid that you will use it and then squeeze out the water. And now let's go through all of these three. We have time. Bemalin says the Gemara, Mayim Bigizustra b'Shabbos. That does not have to be explained. We just explained it. Hada Amaron, he was speaking about a gezustara that has 4 amas by 4 amas or more. That only that. Or as we learned today, applying his klal to 3 other scenarios, even allowing you to use platforms that are smaller than that. Number 2, the Toimnin be'otza maihi, even though the first one is about Shabbos, the last kula is about Shabbos, the middle one is not about Shabbos, but this is the time they're reporting here at Tesefta that what, let me speak it out by heart, in order for produce to become mukhshar lekabel tuma, it has to be wetted with liquids, any one of the 7 halachic liquids, but it has to be done with the awareness and with the contentment of the owner. The pasuk in Shmini, ki yutan ki yitein, he doesn't have to place it himself, but when he is aware of it, he has to be happy that it became wet. Now, what this residue that is being used many times, where did they get it from? So you have a field, you would thresh your grain, you would take out all of the good, and the psoilus you would leave in the field. That psoilus could be used later for you to store your fruit in it. Now, every morning, since it's out there in the field, because of the towel, because of the dew, it's wet. If you gathered this otzah to use as your refrigeration while it was wet, and therefore the paytas that you put in it becomes wet, is it now susceptible to becoming tummy? It depends. If you gather the produce in the morning, the residue, the otzah in the morning, because you dafka wanted it to be damp, because the dampness in this residue is also beneficial for its storage purposes, but if you wanted that, if you want it, then that mayim is chashuv and it's machshav your produce. If the only reason why you gathered this residue in the morning is because you are a working man or woman, you have to go to work during the day. So it was more convenient for you to gather this residue in the morning to get that task out of the way. For you, you didn't care that you didn't need it to be damp. It's damp, but it wasn't negeya to you. If that was not your intent, then even though de facto it's wet with towel, by the way, is one of the 7 liquids, since there is no willingness, there's no contentment, so it's not machsharit. Let's read it inside. Hishkim lavei lahavi, if you wake up early to bring this psoilus, this residue. So if you woke up early, dafke in bishvil sheyesh all of towel, because early in the morning, it's still damp with the dew. If you're going to wait a little bit longer, then the sun is going to make the dew evaporate, and it's going to be dry. So you brought it because you wanted it to be wet, and then you use this dampened psoilus to put fruit in it. Then hareyu b'chiyutan, yitain kiyutan. It's considered now it was wetted to the contentment of the owner. Now it's susceptible to becoming tamei. However, you didn't care for you. If the psoilus is wet or dry, why did you gather it punkt early in the morning? It's because you work during the day. So then, now let me explain the kula of Hananiah ben Akavia. He understood that the people that resided in Tefilla were hardworking people. Now, if you know otherwise, it's different. But he held that Vistam, Dafteches, Anshe Tefilla, are people that work during the day. They don't have time to gather the produce, to gather the psoilus during the day. It's going to be mavatal for their malacha. It's kemi shalei mavatal malachti dami. It's as if they specifically stated that. In other words, you can assume stam is only for convenience, and not because you want to have wet psoilus. So therefore, it's not machsharit. That's what he meant, that you can store your fruit in this otzah, and it won't become mosher. We have another few minutes. And the third kula was that umestapkin, that you are allowed to dry yourself ba'alointis in a towel on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. And maihi, so here we have the Tanya, we learned to sugya Masechta Shabbos, mestapek adam ba'alointis, which is following the shita of Hananiah. However, we learned one shita that you're not allowed to carry it home on Yom Tov or when you have an Eruv on Shabbos, nor are you allowed to give it to the bathhouse attendant. Carrying it home, you will forget and you will wring it out. Now, if you're going to forget and wring it out, so you should not be allowed to use it to begin with? No, because people need it to bathe on Shabbos. So what would they do? So they said, use it, but then leave it there and put it in the window. Don't give it to the bathhouse attendants because they're chashar alei sedavar. They're going to wring it out to give it to the next guy that's coming to the cold bath on Shabbos. Now Shimon was even more lenient. Not only can you use it, but you can even take it home. He also did not allow you to give it to the oil yorin, but so these are the three leniencies. The one that's negeya here again is the concept of over yama shaltavedi of koif and good. Is God willing to be continued? All right, that was great. Guys, the last daf now of Perek Shmini.
Shakaya. Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Peiches. We will be concluding, God willing, the 8th chapter. That means tomorrow we're starting the 9th out of 10 chapters in Masechtas ERUVIN. We're coming towards the end. The big topic that God willing we'll learn right now is that we kept on learning in the last few dafim about the issues of bringing water from a canal, from a water pit. If the water pit has a status of a carmelist and bringing it up into your house is problematic because you can't carry from a carmelist into a reshus hayachid. That was the topic that we had until now. Now the question will be, what about the reverse? Is a person allowed to pour water out from their reshus hayachid back into the body of water? Now obviously, the body of water is a carmelist. The same problem of the carmelist with a reshus hayachid is reshus hayachid to a carmelist. But we're going to be speaking about that you made these halachic mechitzas. And therefore the waters that are directly under the mechitzas that we made over the balcony, the waters in there has a status of a reshus hayachid. Well, when you're drawing it from there into your house, okay, from a reshus hayachid into a reshus hayachid, you're good to go. But when you pour waters out, what inevitably happens? The water first goes into the area that's under the mechitza, but then it's going to be taken out into the sea. It's going to be taken out into the river. It's going to be taken out into the carmelites. Is that problematic? And really, that's going to lead us into a much bigger topic, which will be a big part of Daf Peiches. Aside of over the waters in a body of water, what happens again when you have a chutzin? There was no plumbing in those days the way we have it right now. So it was common that people would either pour water, sometimes people would pour waste. They would pour it out into the chutzit. Now they would build septic tanks. So let's go into those details. What happens if there is a septic tank, but it's already partially full, and you're pouring your shoifchen? Shoifchen means wastewater. You're pouring, now there's, today I know there's gray waters and there's black waters. People will go camping. We can have also similar lashonis. But either type of liquid, when you're pouring something from a reshus hayachid, even if you are pouring it into a uka is the septic tank or a cesspool, it might go now from the cesspool, it might spill over and go into a reshus harabim. Is that problematic or not? Wow. And truth is, you can now bring it back to our modern day living. When a person flushes their toilet in their house, where's the water going? From their house, it's ultimately going into what? Well, the water is not going to be going into a reshus harabim, I get that, but it's going to be going into a carmelist, it's going to be going out of your domain, ultimately, so it's indirect. So we're going to learn about transferring indirect. A big nuance, there's going to be many little nuances, but a big cloud will be, what is your intention? Your machshava will be negeya, direct, indirect will be negeya, and there's going to be a marasayin issue that's negeya. In other words, if it's going to give the appearance that you poured it out directly into a reshus harabim, not in the case of our plumbing, that the Chachamim sees it, but in those days when people would see waters go out from the chutzit, if the chutzit is adjacent to a reshus harabim, and it looks like you did it directly, And people will think, when it comes to wastewaters, you can pour it straight into a Reshus HaRabim. That type of marasayin is also a reason to prohibit or to limit. And using all of the instruments together, we're going to get a whole smorgasbord of different scenarios where it will be permissible and where it will be prohibited. Wow. Okay, so we are going to start, Chevra, on 6 lines from the top of the Amid. In the beginning of the line, the Mishnah, the Gemara is referring back to the Mishnah. I know I spoke in the intro about the cesspool or the septic tank and a chutzah. And let's go back to the case of the Mishnah, that you have a balcony over a body of water. You went ahead and you built halachic mechitzas. And as the Gemara said, if the balcony is over Yamashal Tveria, let's follow Hananya ben Akavia. You don't even have to have mechitzas. You just need to have a platform that is large enough 4 by 4 amas. And then if you make a hole exactly in its center, you could draw the water. Yeah, very nice. Because then the water is coming. But if you're pouring water out, and again, just to know, shoifchin means dirty water. But it's not about clean water or dirty water. That details will be later. It's about the concept of you pouring out. That's going to be asin. Why will it be asin? Because when you pour water through your mechitza, the water will land in a reshus hayachid, which is the water which is directly below the walls of the balcony. But then the water is water. It's fluid. It's going to move beyond the area directly under the mechitzas. It's going to move into a canomelis. Now, it's called indirect. He holds that indirect, that's this version, is asur. There's really a big machlokes about it. And guys, also very important. Again, not to confuse my words of the intro. In the introduction, I spoke later in the daf. That's when you have a reshus hayachid to a reshus harabim. That's a lot more problematic because the marasayin issue is kind of problematic. Here, it's less problematic because there is no reshus harabim here. It's a reshus hayachid into a karmelis. And you're not even doing it direct. And he holds that even indirect is asur. How is this different than the case that we'll have soon? Guys, uka either is called the septic tank or it's called the cesspool. And as we will learn, God willing, on this daf, that if you make an uka in your chutzner, that's the general rule. So you're not pouring it directly on the surface of your chutzner. You are pouring it into the uka, even when the uka won't be able to contain everything that you're pouring. So it's going to go, you're going into the uka, and then it's going to overflow from the uka out to the reshus harabim. The Mishnah says it's permitted in certain circumstances because it's called indirect. So what's the difference? So the Gemara says, no. Hani, the uka, taimi. Taimi means that the water will, the sewage that you're pouring into the uka theoretically can stay there, can cease from overflowing. We're going to learn soon about the size of the cesspool. We're going to learn about the average amount of water that every family in a chutzner uses. In other words, and we'll learn these details soon, that when you have an uka that generally is large enough for it to hold the amount of water that Chazal say a house uses, which is 2 saw of water, since the water theoretically could get absorbed in the uka, which is the whole concept of a septic tank. In other words, it's made in a size that hopefully it's going to just get absorbed in the ground. Then enochanami, even if there's a scenario where it doesn't get absorbed, that's not your intention, right? There's no psikresha b'mizak. We're going to learn about all these details soon. So that's why the Mishnah permits it. But vahani over here, let's use the word of psikresha. And by the way, here is a psikresha by the Rabbanan, because carrying from a reshus hayachid into a karmelis is only the Rabbanan. Here, there's no septic tank. The water will not remain under the partitions of your halachic into your reshus hayachid. The waters will flow out. Since white time, the waters won't get absorbed there. They won't cease. They won't stop from flowing. They will flow. That's why this first sheet that we're learning today, Rabba Bar Afuna holds that lishpoich is asur. Not so simple. So So according to the Shittam Stam, what would they do when you're in a ship? Maybe they would not pour out their wastewater until Motzei Shabbos, according to the Shittam. Even if they make these mechitzas, because late time. Now the other version is no, Aman Abba Bar Afuna. He said the opposite. Don't misunderstand the Mishnah only to be referring to taking the waters from the now created Rishus HaYachid water into your balcony, but don't erroneously say that Mishpaich will be usher because you are indirectly pouring into a carmelist. No, fakir. Elon, by the way, the Paskin like this latter version, which would therefore would allow someone in a ship, in a boat, on Shabbos, as long as they have this halachic mechitza, good achis, to pour the wastewater through it. Avolishvaich nami shari, says Rav Shizvi on this version. Pshita, why did we even need to mention it? Isn't this the next Mishnah of Uka? And we'll see that one is allowed to pour wastewater on Shabbos into the cesspool, into the septic tank. No, so the Gemara says no, it's a chiddush because Mal the Tema, as we'll see, that the whole concept of Uka is that taimi. Again, taimi means it will stop there, it will remain there, it will get absorbed over there. Now there are many nuances that we'll learn soon. Even if the cesspool is already partially full from before Shabbos, it will be permitted. But you're beginning at least with a cesspool. You are beginning with a location that theoretically the kavana, you don't need it for it to go outside. You need it to remain there. But the hani leitaimi, and you therefore might think that it's usher, so that's why we need it, according to this latter version, for Rabbi Barafuna to say that the mechitza that we are speaking about in our Mishnah is a two-way street. Great. Now, we're going to the last part of the Mishnah Daf Pei Zayin Amud Beis. Again, that was the part of the Mishnah that we quoted so many times above, that when you have two gezusterois, if the two balconies were not ma'ariv, since they both have equal access to the hole on the top, to the water hole on the top gezustera, they asked one on the other. Amar Rafuna Amar Rab. Guys, we had this above. Loishanu, that you must join in an eruv. Ella b'smucha. Smucha here is laterally, horizontally. That one, the edge of one balcony is within 4 tfachim of the other one. You have to go up a little bit, but it's close laterally. Therefore, they both have equal access. But if the lower balcony is not only lower, but it's also mufleges, it's 4 tfachim or more away, which means that the accessibility for the lower gezustera is through difficulty. So that was the whole chiddush, that noisnin to the one that's benachas and not to the one that tashmishay kashem. So then Aliyah muteres and Rav l'kaimei da'amar Rav ein adam oiser al chaveri derech avir. Oh, and that's the way we type. Derech avir over here will mean because they have to go 4 tfachim and up. It makes all of that unusable. Or let's go better. Rav says Bachlal that derech avir is not called a tashmish. Very good. Amar Rabba, Amar Rab Chia. And the Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Shaya. Listen to these words. Yesh gazel b'Shabbos. Wow. Yesh gazel b'Shabbos in the Havamina appears to mean that there is a figuratively theft. We're going to learn a lot about this in the Zikin. When a person, God forbid, steals from his fellow, there is a limited amount of ownership we give the Gazlan to the detriment of the Gazlan. And we're going to learn these dinim in a whole different seder. Sometimes he completely acquires it. That's when there is a shinoi to the object that he stole. And even if not, it's also considered, in a limited way, property of the Gazlan. The Havamina of the statement of Yesh Gazel B'Shabbos would mean, what happens if I am adjacent to your property? And the example that would be given over here, we just mentioned this in the last year, I have your property next to mine, a churva, and I, without your permission, I use it. Do I have to make an eruv chatzeros with you on Shabbos, without which I can't go in there, especially if you also have access to it, because my rishus to your rishus, to the shoyes hayachid need to have an eruv. Yesh gazel b'Shabbos. This is Rashi a few lines before the end of the narrow lines. Hashta salka daitoch. The hachi ka'amar muter lizel b'Shabbos rishuyos ulishtamish babur chovasi shel chaver esmuchala. What's if during the week I'm wrongfully, without your rishus, but I am using your churva? Hoyel, says Rashi, the first white line under the Gemara, Stam churva ein ha'ba'olam shtam shema kol kach. Since to begin with, the owner, the real owner, doesn't use it that much. So halachically, we say kani lahai bigezei lasoi. It's considered his, like we say this concept by other Gaslanim, and therefore Venasas Rishusai, and therefore he doesn't have to make an Eruv Chatzitz. That is the Havamina. Now look back in the Gemara, you can keep your finger in Ashi, but then Abchia and Ab Yosef made another statement that the Churva Machzir Liba'alim, that we Dafka don't say that. That when it comes to Shabbos, we want to know who is the Balambas of the Churva. And if you don't own it, then without you being Ma'arif, you can't use it. So the Gemara says you're contradicting yourself. Hagu Fakasha. Omanat Yesh Gezel B'Shabbos Alma. That what does the Bach say? Chanei. And then you're saying the Churva Machzir Liba'alim, which seems to be saying Loi Kanya or Loi Kanei. So the Gemara answers Hachi Ka'amar Yesh Din Gezel B'Shabbos, which means Fakir says Rashi that the din of Gezel, which is that you are obligated to return that which you stole, that kicks in the beginning of Shabbos. And if my house is adjacent your Churva, this is Shitas Rashi. I know I think in the last year we spoke otherwise, but that's Shitas Rashi is by water, no one lives in water, there's no need to make an Eruv. But if I'm adjacent your Churva, and if you own it, I can't use it, even if I'm being mishtamish in it during the week. So I'm a Gazlan, God forbid. But we don't give me any type of halachic ownership. The din of I have to give it back to you kicks in. It's not mine, and I may not use it unless I make an Eruv with you. Keitzad, what does that mean? That's the pshat. Yesh din gezel, the churva machzir leba'al. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabba, that u'moisvina nashmaitzen. When we spoke out this din, there was a challenge on this concept from our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah that if they are smuchim, neither of them can use it. The havamin of the kasha is that the people that live in the lower balcony had no permission to use the hole on the upper balcony. If they have no permission, then it's considered separate to the shuyos. Then it's not that Chatzar Aleph and Chatzar Beis can all use that hole. It's not true. The Amrat that Yesh Din Gezel B'Shabbos, why should they be Asurais? Again, the Havamin is based on the premise that the residents that live in the lower Gezustra have no permission. So the Gemara says, Amarab Sheshes, that they not only did they have permission, but they built a mechitza together. They clearly have permission. Now the problem is, if they own the rights of the higher water mechitza together, the Mishnah kept on speaking about a scenario where for Shabbos only the higher one had that mechitza, which implies that if the lower balcony also has this halachic mechitza, then everyone gets to use their own. Why? If the Mishnah is speaking about a case that the people that live in the lower balcony actually financially participated in the building of the mechitza on the higher balcony, it belongs to them as well, so they have halachic rights to go and use it. Who cares if they have their own water hole? So what? Two reshuyos have halachic access, equal, easy access to the top hole, and they should also one on the other. So the Gemara says the answer is if they would have made, in the case where they also made their own mechitza for the lower water hole, is galuye gali data. They are with that making a declaration that I don't want to use yours on Shabbos. If not, why would they even make it? So even when you own it, we have another leniency. If I am basically being megaladas, as if I'm verbally saying, on Shabbos, I'm not going to use the one from the top, then even though they were not ma'arav, then the people on the top could use it. The problem in the Mishnah is the challenge is only where the people on the bottom, Mechlal made no such lower mechitza, but the nakuda is that the people on the bottom must have halachic rights to make use of the Shabbos partition on top of the water hole on the top gezustera. Okay, now we're going to go with the Mishnah, final Mishnah in the Pedic. And like we spoke out already in the introduction, this is a fascinating topic about pouring water out from the chutzner that will eventually go into the nearby Karmelis, or even worse, the nearby the Shusarabim. And here we go. Says the Mishnah, the last narrow line in the Talmud. Chutzner shehi b'chusa ma'arba amas. This is a very important nakuda. Now, Arba Amas, let me just speak it out. Arba Amas means 4 by 4. We will actually have a machloikas amoy roim in the Gemara, whether we are referring to a chatzar that's 4 by 4, not 8 by 2, or 4 means it has a total of 16 square amas. What's the magic of 16 square amas? Or also 4 by 4, that one house, we're speaking about one house, Chazal averaged their usage of water out 2 sa'ah. 2 sa'ah becomes absorbed, and for that you don't need a square. Any 16 square amas, whether it's 4 by 4 or whether it's 8 by 2, it's going to be absorbed. Oh, and when there is a possibility for the water that you're pouring out of your house into your chutzner to get absorbed in the ground, guys, there's many little kvation, nuances, wrinkles. Here, even if it pours out, it won't be problematic. Some of what's important is your kavanah. You don't need it to go out. It could have gotten absorbed. And if it didn't get absorbed, that's not my intention. That's not a problem. If your chutzner is less than 4, which means it will go out, again, you don't have kavanah, but here it's worse. Since the water will go out, it's a given, that's already considered more problematic. And therefore, the first wide line, in Shoitchem Mitoichem Mayim, the Shabbos LMK, also law uka, you have to make an uka is either called a septic tank or uka is called a cesspool. Lav dafke, where they built in the ground as they are right now. These septic tanks were made out of earthenware. The tank itself absorbed the liquid. As long as the uka is large, that it's machzekes shosayim min hanekev ulamata. Let's speak about a septic tank that's above the ground. So when you speak about how much can it hold, it's not negaya to measure the whole uka. You can have a very large uka, but if every uka was built in a way that once the liquids in there reached the hole, it's like in a bathtub, you know the hole? You don't want the waters to overflow in the bathtub, so somewhere high up, there is absalach, and the water goes out through there. You have to have from underneath that hole to the bottom the amount of 2 saw. In other words, the uka potentially can hold the average sosayim of waters that are going out from a house in one day. Bei, listen to these words, mi bachutz, bei mi bapnim. Wow. What does that mean? Says Rashi. It's 2 lines in the Rashi or 7 lines under the Gemara. Even when the septic tank is actually standing on the Rishus Harabim, adjacent to your chatzit, the inside has a din of Rishus Hayachid. We're speaking about an uka that must have 10 tfachim height, right? Or let me go further. The uka, let's say like this, the uka can be a makim ptur. The uka can be a makim ptur. It's also okay, even though it's outside your yard. What would make your uka into a cardinalist? Guys, you remember what we learned we also learned this in the last daf. If the uka is less than 3 tvachim deep, and it's built on the Rishus Harabim or in the Rishus Harabim, less than 3 tvachim, dina ki Rishus Harabim. Likewise, for it to be a cardinalist, if it to be a makim ptur, it's going to be more than 3 tvachim deep or above the ground, and it's going to be less than 4 by 4. Okay, guys, we're good. L'kula alma, when you have a makim adjacent a Rishus Harabim, even though we learned in the last daf this huge chiddush of you not giving the status of a makim ptur unless it's less than 3 by 3, but if it's near a proper rishus, it's relative insignificant. So as long as the uka has a status of a makim ptur, even though it's mibachutz, you can pour your shoifchem into the uka. But practical consideration, like we mentioned, you need for the uka to be 3 tfachim or more above the ground of the Rishus Harabim, because even if it's less than 4 by 4, if it's within 3 tfachim, it's considered the Rishus Harabim. Now you should know that these cesspools, some of them were not even covered. And if they're not covered, there's a possibility that the branches, the leaves, stuff from out there will go into the bottom of the uka, and it's going to lift the height. Let's think about an uka that's built in the ground. It might have been made 4 tvachim, 5 tvachim, 6 tvachim in the ground. But if over time residue will stop up the bottom of the cesspool, you won't even see it. But now it's going to be part of the Rishus Harabim. So says the Mishnah that if you are using an uka that's mibachutz, it has to be covered for you to be certain that it didn't lose the minimum depth, not to allow it to be bottled to the Rishus Harabim. And if it's built inside, I don't care. I don't care if it's more than 3 tvachim. I don't care if it's less than 3 tvachim. It's in your Rishus HaYachid, you're good to go. Okay. So guys, we learned about an uka. Now we're going me'inyan le'inyan, and we'll see how related they are. Forget about an uka. What about a pipe, a sewage pipe, okay, or a biv? A biv means a pipe. What happens if there's a pipe? The one opening of the pipe is in your Rishus HaYachid, and when you pour something in that pipe, it's going to go out into the Rishus Harabim. Now, these pipes were made out of earthenware, and again, if the pipe itself, if the walls of the pipe will amount to 16 square amas, vited, it could absorb, and it's going to be less problematic. Well, let's go. Now, Eliezer ben Yaakov says that biv that's covered arba amas in the Rishus Harabim, which means that when you pour it out, theoretically, before it goes out into the open, it could have been fully absorbed in this biv. Then, now, who would disagree with that? So the Chachamim disagree. And let me just speak it out by heart, because like we mentioned, there are many nuances here. You have to all put it together. Number one, is it potentially able to get absorbed before it goes into the Rishus Harabim? That's one topic. There's another topic. When you pour something directly in one side of the pipe, then whatever is already in there will exit the other side of the pipe bekoyach, with greater force. If you don't pour it directly in one end, even if it trickles in there and there's going to be a seepage or an exit, it won't be so strong. And now let me speak about the maras ayin topic. If the people standing in the Rishus Harabim, they see water coming out bekoyach, they might erroneously think that for shoifchen, since it's disgusting, Chazal allowed you to pour it straight out into the Rishus Harabim. It looks like you're pouring it out there directly. So the Chachamim say like this: Afilu gad oichatzit meyamon. In other words, and if you want to pour something directly in your pipe, not that the pipe is in the Rishus Harabim covered, so that area is not a din of Rishus Harabim. Even if the pipe is on your gag, and between where you are one opening and the exit, there's 100 amas. Not 16 square amas, 100 amas. Still, lo yishvach al pi abib. Directly in the bib is also. Directly, and why? Let's read inside the Rashi 5 lines from the bottom. Lo yishvach al pi abib kolaymer betoich hacharetz. That pipe was not really a circle. It was like a 180. It was like an indentation. And even though it could get absorbed, even the if you pour directly in there, what happens? It's going to directly cause an output, an outflow, and the water going out, or the drainage, the sewage going out, will be bekoyach into the Rishus Harabim. And so what? The observer will think that you are allowed to pour water right near the Rishus Harabim. And that's something that's awesome. And Gzeira, okay. As long as you don't pour directly in the biv, even though you're pouring it near the biv, this is just a technical thing. So the water doesn't enter one side so strong. So the water in the exit doesn't exit with such koyach. No one is going to think that you poured it directly. And therefore, the same concept, let's compound another nuance. Since it could have gotten absorbed, it's not a problem. Weiter says the Mishnah. Let's go back to the beginning. We're speaking about the chutzner that's less than 4x4. You have to have an ukkah. What does that imply? That if the chutzner has 4x4, then you don't need an ukkah, because the ground of the chutzner itself potentially can absorb everything you're pouring in there. So says the Mishnah, if you have a chutzner and adjacent the chutzner, you have an achsadra. Just to know, a portica in the times of Chazal is an area dafke adjacent a chutzner. So, or adjacent the house. So you have a chutzner and a portica, and together you have the arba amos. That's also good because under the achsadra, that's Maiter Rishus HaYachid. All we need is for the whatever shofchen you're pouring out there to potentially be able to be absorbed in the ground before it goes out, which means that your intention, that's the ikid in our Mishnah, is your kavana. You don't need it to go out. As far as you're concerned, it can stay there. If it goes out, since it wasn't your intention, that's why it's permitted. V'chein, shnei diyotois. If you have two upper stories, two upper balconies, one opposite the other, over a chutzir that is not 4 by 4 amas, and one made an ukah, the other did not make an ukah. Obviously, again, the chutzir is less than 4 by 4 for each, because if you have that amount, then there's no issue. What is the question? We'll see more details. I'll just give you a heads up. Can I pour from my diyoita straight into the ukah, straight into the ground? So only the ones that made the ukah are allowed to pour it. The ones that did not make the ukah may not pour it. And again, a lot is vague over here, and we'll leave the details for the end of the Perek, which God willing we'll get to within a half an hour. So before we comment to the whole Sefer, the Mishnah began telling you that you have to build a septic tank only if the chutzir is less than 4 by 4. Why is that? So we kept on mentioning, because if it's less than 4 by 4, then the average output of mayim to a house is 2 sa'ah. 4 by 4 is enough. 4 amas by 4 amas, or we'll see 16 square amas, is enough to absorb that shoifchen. Now we'll see there's another nuance that is needed according to one Amay. Amar Rabba. Rabba says it's not enough that you have enough space that could absorb. There's something else that's needed. And that is when a person pours the water out, what is your intention? Do you want for it to stay in the chutzir? Is there any benefit for that liquid to stay in the chutzir? Or do you dafka want it to go out? According to Rabba, if you dafka wanted to leave the chutzir, you got yourself a problem. Says Rabba, like we mentioned, Adam doesn't mean one person, it means a bias. That's the amount of water that's going out. And this is very important. When you have an area that's 4 by 4, not 8 by 2, 4 by 4, it's a hush of a piece of land. Don't think it's that big, guys. 4 amas is 6 feet by 6 feet. It's large enough that people would make use of it. And the challenge of using outdoor space, especially we'll see later in the Gemara, is that when the earth is very dry, it becomes very dusty and it becomes less usable. And there is a upside of you throwing liquids on it, regardless of what type of liquid it is, because whatever you're throwing on it right now, even if it's shoifchem, it's disgusting, but it's going to get absorbed. But it does ziluf. Ziluf means you're getting rid of the dust. We're going to learn many times together that the way they would do ziluf inside the homes, people had earthen floors, is they would use yayin. Remember all the inferior yayins, because then not only would they get the ikid, which is to bring the dust down, but there's going to be a good aroma. When we have this, I think, in brachas, we're going to have this throughout. Here we're speaking about outside. Outside, the smell will go away quick. So when you have 4 by 4 and you also want lizalfan, which means that you actually benefit for the water not to flow out. That makes the outflow even less intentional. That's take Hassan at base. But if the area is less than 4 by 4, so when you pour water there, there's never an intent for ziluf, because an area that does not lend itself to be used for basically anything, because it's not even 4 by 4, doesn't need to have ziluf. So there, are you kidding? Waste of water. You don't want it in your yard. You want it to go out. The moment you want it to go out, if you don't have an ukah, now again, if it's 4 by 4, again, it's not just about machshava, then you also want it to stay there. So here, either avadukah, so then shari, Eloi, and if not, asur. Now, says, just read inside the Rashi, because even according to Rabbah, your machshava is of tremendous importance. Pachus midala, the top Rashi, since the area is Einoi Ra'ul Zalif, in other words, it doesn't lend itself to be used for anything that needs Ziluf. So therefore, this Shoifchan, you want the waters to go out. The Chinafki, and when the waters go out, when they do go out, is Mekaima Machshaftoi. Your intention was fulfilled. You did not do it directly, so what? Since you wanted it to go out, the Gazur Rabbanan Alei, Dilma Asi Lemishrei Zika Be'edel Rishus Harabim. Because even when it goes out, and even though that was your machshava, because of it being indirect, it's not a problem. It's the Rabbanan that you might, especially by Shoifchen, people think, there's Kavod Abriyas, they will allow you. And no, you're never allowed to pour out Shoifchen, Meirishus Hayachin L'Rishus Harabim. The second line in the Gemara, Rab Zayda says, I don't need this whole thing of Ziluf. Forget about Ziluf. Simple. Dalodam is Kaime. Kaime means that the water that you pour will cease, will stay in that locale, because that amount of earth is enough to absorb the average society. Pachus midalid, since loy taime, again, regardless if your intention is for the waters to go out, but did it need to happen? Is it clear that it's going to happen or not? My benayu, what's the extra nuance? Kveich of a rabbi, I'll tell you. What happens if you have an area that's very long, 8 amas long, it's only 2 amas wide, you have a total of 16 square amas. According to Rab Zayda, you don't need to build a nuka. Because if that is your chatzin, the waters are able to be taimei in it. According to Rabbi, you also need to have this concept that the area has to lend itself for another use. Something that's very long, but it's very narrow, doesn't lend itself for another use. You don't do ziluf there. And whenever it's clear that you want the waters to go out, that was the Rashi, the Nabba says, even though the waters could have gotten absorbed, if you wanted to go out and it's clear, then they made a gzeda that you might pour it out directly and it's us. So Machlaik is Rabba and Rab Zayda, we're going to try to substantiate and refute without success. Tanan, in our Mishnah we learned Chatzar Sadra, one adjacent to the other. Mitzvah from Ladal. And the Havamina is that when you put them together, it's not exactly 4x4. That was the Havamina. So again, Bishlam Rab Zayda, all you need is a sum total of 16 square amas, and then you are allowed to pour water in the chatzit even without the ulka, then good. You need to have dafka, that area that lends itself for other usages for which normally you would need to do ziluf, kasha. So it's beautiful. Sometimes the Avos Yisrael. It's one, Rab Zayda defended Rabba. Rab Zayda argued with Rabba, but he says, you cannot refute Rabba from here. Tirgama, Rab Zayda, leave it at Rabba. No. No, if you look, you have a picture that it's, let's say each one is 4x2 and 4x2. And when you consider them together, because physically they are together and they belong to the same person, now it becomes like a 4x4. Only then did the Mishnah allow you to pour water even without the ulka. Tashama, another attempted proof from an akasha from a braisa. Chatzar she'ein ba dalad amas al dalad amas ein shoifchen letoicha mayim b'Shabbos. Exactly what we learned in without a nuka, which is exactly what we learned in the Mishnah. Now the braisa says dalid al dalid, dalid al dalid. In our Mishnah, chatzar she'pechusa ma'arba. So in our Mishnah, it's not clear. Less than arba. But now that you say 4x4, asks the Gemara, does that not mean Bishlam el Rabba 4x4 is mashma meduyik, not 8x2, 4x4. But according to Rab Zayda, why would the Braisa says 4x4? No, that's not a kash. Why not? So here we start. Omar loch Rab Zayda says Rabbi Zayda, ho mani rabbanon apam. What did we learn in our Mishnah? Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the Chachamim. Another kveich. Another nuance, that you may not pour water directly into a pot, directly into a bib. Guys, by bib, there's no ziluf. You're pouring it into a pipe. You're not even pouring it on the ground. What's the issue? That when you pour something directly into a pipe, whatever, not that what you're pouring it will go out, but if there's other stuff in there, that koyach is going to make the other exit happen with greater intensity. And then it's going to look like we learned inside the Rashi. And therefore, let's read inside the Rashi around 18 lines on the top of the Amid. Sharu, Mishum, Shiur, Makam B'liyas Hamayim. Aside of, by the bib, in the case of the pipe, it didn't help. The Chachamim said, even if it's 100 amas long, it's not only about getting absorbed. There was this other thing, like we learned in the Mishnah, says in Rashi, Afilu bib mea amal lo yishpach ha'toichei, directly, el al agag o el ha'chatzel alma, kamo didu, mishum, ziluf hu, vegabe bib, megale daite de koshofach, the labar zilufu. In other words, how do we explain the Chachamim? The Chachamim Taka allow you to do it when there's the potential for ziluf. He's connecting the next machloikis to this machloikis. And when you're pouring it into a pipe, you dafke don't want ziluf. You're putting it into a pipe. You don't want it to bring the dust down on your field. Which means, if that's the reason behind the Chachamim, the ratio of the Mishnah must be Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, all he says is that if the pipe, even if it's in the Rosh Hashanah, if a total area of 16 square amas are covered, it's only about could it get absorbed or not. So come back over here. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Gavaldik. And the Braisa that says 4x4, which again, the way he's learning Pshat, it's not just about it leaving Bekoyach, but the problem that the Chachamim have with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is that the heter is only when there could be the concept of ziluf. If it's not with ziluf, it's always going to be usher. So and a chanami. So what area needs ziluf? No one is debating that. Not 8x2, not a total of 16 square amas, but dafka dalad by dalad. Says the Gemara, why are you being doicha that the ratio of the Mishnah, right? It goes only according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Because when we learned the Mishnah, it didn't need to be that way. It could have been just the way Rashi learned. It's just about, does it go up the koyach or not the koyach? Here we're adding another nuance. On top of that, it's only problematic because it's not lezilov. So Amarava must listen kasha say, what was he medaik in the Mishnah? My area the tani chotzer shehi pechusa litane chotzer she'ein ba dal dames. The exact contrast that we made when we quoted the Braisa. The Braisa says 4x4. Why didn't our Mishnah write 4x4? That in itself, be medayik from our Mishnah that you don't need 4x4. You need a total of 16 square amas. So that is the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Elulav shlamino, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that clearly doesn't need 4x4 because a bib doesn't have 4x4. A bib is long. Yes, you have a covered area that's sum total 16 amas. How does it even flow in the Mishnah of Ahami? The Sefer Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, does that not imply that they shall have Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? So the Gemara says, as we have many times, second last in the narrow lines, Kul Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Bechsura Mechsra Bachiktani, Chatzer Shipuchus Midalad Amis, not Dalad Al Dalad. We don't care about that. We only care if the water is able to be timey or not. That's the only thing we care about. So if timey, good. If it won't get absorbed, then ein shreifchen otoichamayim b'Shabbos, which means that if it has a sum total of dalid, not dalid al dalid, a sum total of dalid, then you are allowed to pour it out because all we care about is it absorbable or not. That's the only thing we care about. Even a bivak common, if you have a pipe that's covered, the covering part is to make it sure that it's all part. It's not part yet of the Rosh Hashanah. Daladam is even in the Rosh Hashanah because it could be absorbed. And according to this understanding, it is the Chachamim that they are the ones that dafka need on top of absorbability, on top of the bekoyach, but it has to be an area that people normally benefit by the dust coming down. We're going to the ratio of the Mishnah. So when you pour it in a chatzar of dalad al dalid, your machshava is not for it to go out, and your intention will be crucial. Says the Gemara, Masnisin l'choida is not like Hananya, because we learned in a Braisa, Hananya says that afilu gag meya amo lo yishvoich, you're not allowed to pour lefi. Now, by the way, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov doesn't allow you. The Chachamim are the ones that say Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is the most lenient. You can pour it directly in a pipe as long as it can get absorbed before it goes out. Chachamim hold whether it's going to go out b'koyach, there's zicher no ziluf, all of these things together make it asur. But at least the Chachamim said that if you don't pour it directly in the bib, that was the Mishnah. If you pour it on the gag and then it pours down and it makes its way into the bib and it makes its way out, the Chachamim allowed that. And now that Hanania is the most machmer. He says, "Afilu gag mea ama," you can't pour it on the roof because she'ein agag also livloya. Because we know that you're not pouring it on the roof for it to get absorbed on the roof. The roofs then were not made out of earthenware. It was only made lekaleach, and it's going to make itself into this conduit. And even though it's indirect, Hanania is even more machmer. Okay, very good. So now we have the three shitas. Says the Gemara Tanach we learned in a brayso. Now this brayso, the Bamed Dvarim Amurim, let's go to Rashi's Pshat. When do we say that a septic tank is required? When the chatzar is less than 4, that is the Bamed Dvarim Amurim. Now a whole new layer to the whole sugya. That's only b'yamai sacham. That's only in the summer season. In other words, since it's the summer season and you're the opposite of ziluf now, you don't want for your chatzar to get ruined with mud. Even if it's less than 4 by 4, since you don't mind, one second over here, since you don't mind for it to remain in the chutzner. Why don't you mind for it to remain in the chutzner? Because it's muddy anyways. Then you are allowed to pour it even without the uka. Wow. My Tama, says the Gemara, Amar Rava. Again, let's go back to this. What's your kavana? Adam roitze sheyibolu mayim mekayimim. Roitze doesn't mean that you dafka wanted to get absorbed there. Roitze means that during the winter, when your chatzit is muddied, you don't care if it stays there. So this braisa, not the way we're learning it, this braisa says that as long if you wanted to leave, that is where you have a problem. If you don't care if it stays there, again, that's the Bamed Dvarim Amurim, Larashi. Even if your chatzit is small and you don't have a septic tank, you are allowed to pour water onto your chatzit. Zoizak Rav. Amalei Abaya. Hold on. Baharei Shoifchen. The Adam Reitze Shiyabala. Like we mentioned, you don't want the Shoifchen to go anywhere when you're pouring it into a pipe. In the case of the Mishnah of a bib, you want it to go. You want it to stay there. If I get the pipes were made out of earthenware for it to get absorbed. Nevertheless, what was the whole shita? Not that the Chachamim hold lo yishvayich. So it's not only about do you care? No, it's about if it's going to go out b'koyach, then you have this gezerah. So Amalei. So this is the chiddush now of Rava, something that we did not learn in the Mishnah. That Hassan over there. Like we mentioned, the case of the braiso, where we have a chatzit in a rainy season where you could pour it on the chatzit, there's no fear. You can't say the person has an intent for it to go out because his chatzit is muddied anyway. Like we learned in the Mishnah, people are going to say that you are pouring it directly out. No one is going to say that. Why will no one say that? If they see in a pipe, because during the winter, pipes and gutters are anyways continuously flowing with water, which means, my friend, that the case of the Mishnah, that's the Chiddush, now is only b'yamai sachamon. We didn't have it in the Mishnah. That Ravas being machadesh, that when did the Chachamim say you may not pour directly in the pipe? When there's no flowing water out. That is the Gzeida Shema Yoimru. But during Yemai Sachama, during Yemai Sachshamim, which is the time that the Braisa allows you to pour it even without an Uka, Take, the Chachamim will allow you to pour directly into the bib. Like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That's a big novelty. Omar Rav Nachman says Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman has a new understanding of the Braisa, which is the Yemai Sachshamim. Since uka, when you have an uka that's machzik sosayim, then you can pour out the normal amount of water that every home uses, which is Sosayim. During the Maisak Shamim, what happens if you have an Uka that's only Machzik Sa'ah? We say, again, the Bryce is more lenient, but it's not. You don't need an Uka. You need an Uka. But what happens if your Uka is small? Then we allow you to use the equivalent amount, because again, you're only pouring in the Uka that which could be absorbed in the Uka. The Maisak Hama, we are more Machmir. He's not being as much as extreme as Rabbah, but there's a difference between summer and between the rain season. When you have an Uka that's Machzik Sosayim, then Nois Sosayim. But if you have a Uka that's only Machzik Sa'ah, then you can't do anything. So therefore, again, also, our Mishnah is speaking about the Hachama. So that is the similarity between Rav Nachman and Rabbah. Says the Gemara, why would you make that difference? The Chama, okay, even if you don't have a Uka that's Machzik Sosayim, Nami, at least if you have a Uka that's the size of a saw, Nathan lo saw, answers the Gemara, holds Rav Nachman, Gzeira, Dilma Asi Litin lo Sosayim. Okay, so then let's go back to Maisak Shamim. So here Rav Nachman is agreeing to the general approach of Rabbah. Hasa, my Nechushlam, during the winter, Imishum Kilkul. And therefore, what's the issue? That since it's not machzik, so you know it's going to run off. So what? You don't need it to run off because everyone understands what you want it to run off because you don't want your chutzah to get ruined. It's anyways winter. Winter, everything is muddy. If it's because it's going to run off big koyach, let's go back to the case of the biv, and people are going to think that you are pouring water. No one is going to think that because b'chlal, all the gutters is water running anyways. And therefore, even though he's not as lenient as Rabbah, but he's also limiting our Mishnah to Yemai Sachamon. Now, Amar Abaya, and according to many, Abaya is agreeing with Rabbah, but at the moment, it's anyways winter. And therefore, the person who's pouring water in the chutzner doesn't care if the chutzner gets muddied. People that are standing in the street, even when they see an overflow of whatever, of water, of shayf going out into the street, no one is going to think that you poured it because b'chlal in winter, water is running all over the place. So therefore, how much liquid can you pour during winter? Afilu koyed, could be poured by Maisak Shamim. Okay. And now, when we learned the Mishnah, the end of the Mishnah has to be clarified. So the Mishnah spoke about there were two diyotos. There were two balconies, two upper stories. The Mishnah L'chura speaking, that's not clear, is the chutzah 4x4, is the chutzah not 4x4. The Mishnah spoke about one household made the uka, the other one didn't. Only the one that made the uka can use it and not the other one. Let's clarify the Mishnah. Zakt the Gemara, Amar Rava, guys, 4 lines from the bottom of the Amud, that this prohibition on the one who did not make the uka, not to use the uka, the issue is not about two people live there. You have to make an eruv chatzeres. That is even if there is an eruv. In other words, the issue is not about carrying. Now, obviously, you're going to ask, if there was no eruv, then no one should be allowed to use it. We'll get there in a moment. But it has nothing to do with an eruv. There is an eruv. Now, Amar, whether Amar Le Abaya or Amar Abaya, let's understand the Mishnah. My Tamon. If the reason why there's a problem for the one who did not actually build the uka to use that uka is because, okay, there are two houses. We say every house uses an average of output 2 saw. The uka, let's say, only has 2 saw. So the reason why the one who did not make it cannot use it is because it's not large enough, if that's the issue, because the nefisha maya, 2 houses use 4 saw. No, the hatanyam. When you have a chutzner, and in the chutzner there is the uka. That's very important. The moment you have an uka, what happens if one house is going to be using more than 2 saw? We don't have a problem. But the moment there is an uka and you are pouring it in the uka, even if it's going to flow out, there's no problem. So if you have an uka, or if you have a gistor as they used to use for their above the ground septic tanks or cesspools, they would have a large kalim that broke. So they would use that to hold the sewage water. Or if you have a brecha, nebach, there was a fish pond that's now becoming your cesspool. Or if you have areva, means Rashi says you have a small boat. Imagine. So, and you're using that as the storage place for the water of that chutzner. So the din is, the Braisa says explicitly, as long as it has the minimum size, so it's full to the top. That means when you're going to pour your sheifchen, it's going to go in and some of it is going to overflow out. You are allowed to pour water in there in Shabbos. It's considered unintentional. No, it's you build an ukkah. The whole daf that we learned today. Your kavan is not dafke for it to go out. So enechanami, 2 houses, use 4 sa'ah, but still, if there is 1 ukkah, they should both be allowed to use it. This is clarifying what Rava meant. The whole issue of our Mishnah is there is an ukkah made by 1 household. The reason why the one is not allowed to use it is because they made no eruv. Now, let me ask you a question. If there's no eruv, which means that no one is allowed to take stuff from their house into the chutzner. So how does the one that built the ukkah, how do they use it? The answer is they're not carrying, let's say, a keli filled with wastewater into the chutzner and pouring it into the ukkah. They can't do that. No one can do that. That's why the Mishnah spoke about a diyotos. Diyotos means they are in an upper story, there's a balcony, and they want to pour their waste directly from the upper balcony into the ukkah. So here's where the Mishnah says the one that's directly above it, is the one that made it, where do you think they made it? They made it convenient for them. That's the way Tosfos explains it. Tosfos in the second to last line on Tosfos, it's about the ukkah being far or being near. It's a common sense, practical answer. So there's no eruv. No one can carry a keli, which normally you would carry your keli, a small keli filled with waste. You would go downstairs to the chutzner and pour it into the. They didn't make an eruv. The chashash is that if you will allow them to pour it from their second story, they might forget and go downstairs. And if indeed they made an eruv, then they both can use it. The ukkah is only sosayim, and 2 houses uses 4. So that we already said. The moment you have an ukkah, which means that the kavana of the bnei chutzner is to put it in the ukkah. If it will overflow, that's called unintentional, and that's okay. So what, they made no eruv. So Amar Ravashi Gzeira Dilma Asila Puke Mimam made the bottom lahasam. They're going to take the keli down, and the one who made the ukkah. So that's and we just read the Tosfos that the one who built the ukkah built it right under its porch. So for them, it's easy to pour it out there. The one that did not build it means that it's farther away. Because of that fact, they're going to have the menschlichkeit of saying, I'm not going to try to throw it, and if I'll miss, I'm going to soil up the whole chutzner. So they might go downstairs, and that is the gezerah why they may not use it. On that we say, Hadran Allah Ketzat Mishtatfen, God willing, tomorrow, Gavaldik, we are already starting the second to last Perek in ERUVIN, to be continued.
So the guy that's directly above, is he allowed to throw it or not?
Allowed to throw it, even though there's no eruv.
And so I thought we're not allowed to throw a ball, we're not allowed to throw things if there's no eruv from our Yachid?
No. The ukkah itself is not considered part of the chutzner. The ukkah itself is the septic tank.
So that's okay.
Is the septic tank, and it belongs to you. But the other one, if it would have been directly othered, it would also be allowed to do it. It's not the isur of Shlomo HaMelech of not using a common chutzner. You're using just a ukkah. We're not okay. In other words, if I'm not ma'arev with you, forget in a city where there's no eruv, we can both be sharing the same sewage pipe. You don't have to be ma'arev to use a sewage pipe.